All right, we are going to get started here. Welcome, everyone. I'm Tamara Pogue. I am one of the 3 Summit County Commissioners. And welcome to Housing the Missing Middle, which is the next part of our County 101 series. Some of you may have attended our first event in the series with Commissioner Blanchard a couple of months ago. That was around understanding Colorado's water challenges. And next up, after Housing the Missing Middle, Commissioner Lawrence will be hosting a panel on childcare this spring, so keep your eye out for that. Really appreciate everyone being here today to talk about my favorite topic, Summit County's missing middle, or the state's missing middle. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, if you park in front of animal control and you are not planning to take home a kitten or a puppy, please go move your car. They need to be able to get in and out, and that's the building on the far side of the parking lot. Second of all, I want to make a particular thanks today to iFurnish, and I think I saw Tony Costello somewhere. Where's Tony?
Right here.
Hi, Tony. Thank you for donating the chairs. If anyone really likes them, you can buy one and take it home with your puppy. Don't put your puppy on the chair. That's my best advice. All right, so there's also lunch over there. You can wait till after or get it now, whatever makes you happiest. So the topic of middle-income housing is one that is really relevant to Summit County. It is such a struggle for Summit County's middle-income residents to stay in Summit County. And by middle income, I mean 140% AMI. That is $140,000 for a family of 4. So those are our teachers, our pharmacists. Those are our first responders. Those are many of us in this room today. And it has historically been very difficult housing to build, particularly in places like Summit County where our cost of construction is so high. So we are going to explore that today. Why is it difficult? What are all these fine folks doing to help communities like ours build middle-income housing? What is Summit County working on in this space? And we will end up today with questions from all of you. So start thinking about very good questions to ask at the end. With no further ado, I want to introduce our panelists today. And I'm going to go in no particular order because I want everyone to be waiting with bated breath to be introduced. So first up, we have Geraldine Francis from the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, sorry.
That's all right.
She's the Chief Communications and Community Partnerships Officer. Welcome.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Andrew Paredes. Did I do it?
Yep.
Oh, yes. From the Division of Housing at the Department of Local Affairs, and he's the Director of Housing Finance and Sustainability. Then we have Nathan Lindquist, who's from CDOT. He's a land use planner. You can't hold any of those things against him, I promised.
Sorry.
And then we have Jason Dietz, who many of you know as Summit County Government's Housing Director. We have Eleni Angelidis from the Governor's Office. She is the Deputy Legislative Director. And then last but certainly not least, Garrett Sharton from Servitas, the Vice President of Development Services. And Servitas is the developer working on our U.S. Forest Service project. And we have a number of our partners here today, the town of Dillon and the U.S. Forest Service here as we talk about that. So I'm going to kick this off by letting our panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about why middle-income housing is what it is and why is it difficult to build. So Garrett, do you want to kick us off and we'll go around?
Sure. So I'm going to kick us off with the hardest question. All right, great. So why is this so hard? I think it's important to maybe zoom out for a second, and I think everyone in the room recognizes that this is a generational problem. It's been around a long time. So in many ways, it's structural. It's systemic with the constraints for development. And what's happened in the meantime is around the year 2000 till present, we were on about a once every 10-year clip. We get hit with a black swan. So something in the economy happens, it just hits us out of nowhere. I'm a student and kind of a quick study of the credit crisis in 07, 08. Housing in general really hasn't recovered in new permitted builds since then. Now, the most recent black swan being COVID-19, things that happened in hindsight that no one could have predicted, right? So we turned off capitalism, we just shut off the economy. When we turned it back on again, it didn't run the way it had been running, and we're still coming out of that. construction costs going up dramatically is a large part of that. Too much money after too few goods. Interest rates as a way to squelch that problem have shot up dramatically as well. Other things like an eviction moratorium. No one could have really predicted that our public health policy reaction to that COVID-19 crisis would include the CDC issuing an eviction moratorium. So for all the developers in the room that live and die by that type of math, your models were kind of thrown out the window. And so you look at a community like this that's had this issue, this challenge for a very long time, now layer on top of it black swan after black swan, and really struggling with reacting to reacting to it and coming up with a solution. So why is it so hard? As soon as you get a good footing and you get some traction, you get hit with something that you didn't expect. So I think that's the hardest part about housing the missing middle. And we have to be kind of humble about how we're going to address the challenge, because whatever we come up with today, and God bless Colorado for coming up with the Middle Income Housing Authority and the Middle Income Access Program. They're definitely policy leaders in this space. But whatever we come up with has to be sufficiently nimble to react to the next thing that we couldn't predict. So I would say, why is it so hard? Well, it's so hard because we can't predict what's going to hit us next.
Eleni.
I just wanted to first out saying thank you for hosting us today. We're really excited to be here and not in the Capitol. It's a really great audience. I think, to your point, Garrett, I do think that there's a lot of flexibility that needs to be had, especially in areas like this. I think, Commissioner Pogue has been a really great voice at the Capitol, really addressing that gap above 60% of AMI. Even last year and the year before, we've seen close to $1 billion of investment in affordable housing through American Rescue Plan Act, General Fund. Now we'll have Proposition 123 coming online, but we still have to make some policy changes to pair and leverage that funding. I know Summit County has invested incredible resources, and the state wants to walk in step with local partners to leverage that funding into the future, but we still have that gap in workforce housing or middle housing. I think part of that also comes to some of the types of housing that haven't been able to be built, really looking at those duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. I think Summit has also been a leader in ADUs and addressing some of these challenges in other cities and counties across the state as well, but also land use impacts affordability. When we just think of housing as the traditional single family house, we're also ignoring other types of housing that, could be appealing to, the local workforce or a first-time home buyer. And I think the governor's, vision in addressing parts of these challenges is not only to have local flexibility to address area median incomes that make sense for each community, but also to allow for other types of housing and really take a step back from our traditional view of single-family homes. Not saying that those are not, great options, but to have more options so that you can have options for every Colorado budget, including the local workforce, teachers, firefighters, pharmacists, and so forth. I think the other piece of this too, in addressing what's challenging when it comes to middle housing, is also just the availability of land. That is a real challenge. I think that the state really does want to address some of those challenges by offering up state-owned land in partnership with local jurisdictions that might own land to address those high costs. If you can offer up land with a 99-year ground lease or through a community land trust and really buy down the cost of land, that can also be part of the solution. It's not the silver bullet, but that's also another factor, especially in the high country areas where land is not as available. I think just on the financing side, as I mentioned, with all of these investments we've had in the last few years, and why I give such kudos to Commissioner Pogue in bringing that rural resort voice to the Capitol, is that we've historically never been able to fund middle income or above 60% of AMI, 60 to 120 or 60 to 140, just because of federal guidelines and just our state financing options. And really last year with 1304, we really took that and made it way more flexible to address the needs in each area, rural resort regions, rural counties and rural areas, and then urban areas as well. And then the last thing I'll just mention, because you brought it up, we are in the process of implementing the Middle Income Housing Authority to provide more innovative financing options to address middle income housing and make it a little bit easier to source those financing options.
Okay. Well, hi everybody, Nathan Lindquist. As Commissioner Polk said, I have 2 strikes against me starting out here. I'm with CDOT and also a land use planner. So I'll speak today from more the second part of this. CDOT obviously is transportation and land use are very intertwined, of course. How housing gets developed is very affected by transportation and CDOT. But before I've been at CDOT for 2 years. Before that, I was planning director for the city of Rifle. And so spent a lot of years trying to work on the same middle housing issues there that the state is now trying to tackle a little bit as a whole. And so to answer the question, like how does land use affect the ability to provide middle housing, I think it's different everywhere, right? And that's the perspective the state's trying to bring to this. I lived in Rifle for a long time. I live in Denver now and have been learning more about what's going on there. Obviously, Summit County is its own animal with its own challenges, expensive land costs, black swans, as you were saying. I think another really big black swan was just how COVID changed telework and remote work, and that really changed the ball game for places like Summit County and our rural resort areas in the state, where now when people can live anywhere, own second homes, and along with that, the technological changes that happen with short-term rentals. So those are all things we have to take into account, realizing that rural resorts and how land use and how the state can work with local governments in this is going to be different in the rural resorts versus the urban areas versus the places like Rifle, which are kind of the bedroom communities supplying the workforce for the rural resorts. But one of the commonalities you see in a lot of these places is when it comes to land use, like how hard it is to match the overall community needs with maybe the neighborhood needs where the housing wants to go, right? And so every community deals with this trade-off where the community as a whole supports housing, supports middle housing, wants to have it, but they would all rather, of course, that it happened in someone else's neighborhood, ideally, rather than maybe theirs. And so that really is where I think land use planning and zoning really hits the rubber hits the road, and figuring out, how do we solve this problem fairly and so that everyone is doing their part. So I think that's a little bit of what, given the level of the need now and the crisis, there's just not just in Colorado, but really across the country, a lot more focus on this issue of how does zoning help provide these needs.
Thanks. So I'm Andrew Paredes from the Division of Housing, and my group at DOH primarily deals with housing finance. And as Eleni alluded to, up until 2-3 years ago, very much to the credit of Commissioner Pogue and other rural resort communities who have really advocated for expanding our horizons at the Capitol. Up until a few years ago, our bread and butter was that old-fashioned tax credit financed affordable housing, which is great, and it builds a great product and helps a lot of people. But it also comes with absolute constraints. And over the last couple of years, we've been able to think a little bit more outside the box and think about how can, in my little corner of the state, how can the state provide financing support to get housing projects developed above that very low income threshold, and or how can the state provide financial support to individual homeowners to be able to buy their first house. As you've seen in communities like this, that kind of ability or dream is almost disappeared, right, in the last year and a half or more, as single family home prices have just skyrocketed. So it's been fun and innovative to be able to think about this. And I really think that the easy answer is, Eleni mentioned House Bill 1304, which provided $138 million of grant money to spark development right away. That's an easy answer, but it's also not sustainable in terms of grants, right? The government can't, or the taxpayers can't afford to grant that money year over year. The legislature has also provided additional financing tools, and that's where we are really beginning to play. Could the role of state government finance be to kind of walk alongside private financial partners in taking some of the risk off of real estate development investing, taking the profit motive out of kind of finance and banking so that it can drive those interest rates to developers or homeowners down to generate more affordability while also getting some of that money repaid 5, 6, 7 years into the deal, and then being able to recycle it in other communities or the same community as more developments come online. So we are really scratching the surface of that now at the Division of Housing and really learning how to roll those kind of funds out the door. As I'm up here with you, 20 of our staff are down in Denver going over the initial round of these transformative grant applications for those, above 80% AMI projects. So it's very exciting that we're beginning to do it, and also very challenging, but really looking forward to what the future can bring from a very nerdy finance side of things.
Jason.
Thanks, Andrew. As similar to what Andrew was talking about, the missing middle and what others have mentioned, missing middle being above 60% AMI financing, because the LIHTC financing programs that have been around for a long time make it much easier to develop affordable housing, 30 to 60%. But the missing middle, especially since COVID, has been growing and growing and growing. It used to be 60 to 100 to 120 to 140. In Summit County, it's probably to 200 because with the cost of the average home being above $1 million. The missing middle is a very broad swath of our economy, of our workers, of housing typologies. It's rental, it's for sale. And it covers, it's gotten bigger in the last 3 years, 5 years, and it continues to grow. And primarily because of financing. The market rate developers used to be able to build, that 120, 130, 140. Now with the cost, as has been mentioned before, the cost going up on everything, land, materials, labor, supply chain shortages, and catch up with that, and the world economy coming out of the shutdown, everything has gone through the roof, and the profit margins aren't there. So that requires the jurisdictions to step in and provide subsidies, and for a wide range of product types. And with rentals, it can take a really long time to get that money back, and it can be really complicated to get the financing in place. And the state has been great to, as they've broadened their scope of what they're looking to help facilitate and create housing with, as we've come out of COVID. It's been really a good thing as we've broadened our scope of the missing middle. And then, land use planning, single-family housing. Everyone likes single-family housing, but to have a single-family home in most areas, it eliminates a wide swath of the population. You have to be, you have to have a lot of money and relatively affluent. So tackling issues with density and traffic to create more opportunities for the wide range of missing middle type housing. So we're working on that and continue to work on that with a lot of different strategies that we're putting forward and trying to push forward.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. So Jerry Lynn Francis with Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. In just a minute, about what Colorado Housing and Finance Authority is. We are a statewide organization that invests in affordable housing and the full continuum of affordable housing. So folks who are transitioning out of homelessness all the way through folks who are approaching first-time or repeat homeownership and everything in between, which includes that middle-income housing space, and is so key. And I think I would echo and support what all the colleagues on the panel have said about why it is so challenging. But in our work as an investor, I think I would really focus in on historically the lack of federal and state resources that have been able to be leveraged to support that middle-income housing space. As some of the colleagues up here have said, normally the tax credit program, which is the program that we at CHEFA administer, really has only been allowed to serve at 60% of area median income. And let me put that in dollars, because what does that mean? What does 60% of area median income even mean? It means $43,000 in annual gross income for a one-person household in Summit County. Those AMIs for the program vary by county, and they vary by household size. So that's just to give you a snippet of what it means for a one-person renter household in Summit County. Over time, the program has adjusted to allow it to be used to serve up to 80% of area median income, which would take that up to roughly $58,000 for a one-person bedroom household. But that's not meeting the needs, as everyone has talked about. So we're making some progress in the program, and it's a good program for the niche it's intended to serve, but it's not the silver bullet for everything. So the work to innovate, to craft new solutions, new strategies, is starting to make great momentum. As everyone has said, Commissioner Polk has been such a leader in that space. We really applaud her and the state policy partners for their work. We at CHAFA have done some innovation in that space as well, which we'll talk about later. But I think it really has required all of us working together, local community leaders, statewide policy partners, folks in the investor space, folks in the developer space, and you all, members of the community, to come together and say, hey, let's keep what's working well where it's working, but let's be honest about maybe where we're seeing gaps. And those gaps are, again, partially systematic, partially because of the black swans, partially because even though incomes have been rising, they've not, in some cases, they've not been rising in nearly all cases at the same level that housing costs have increased. And so you just have that dispersion that requires addressing. So thanks for being with us here today so we can talk about all of this.
Awesome. We have a very smart panel. You guys are all experts. So let's break this down a little bit more. In a community like Summit County, where the cost to build a home costs the same, whether it's market rate or workforce housing, the challenge really is the more expensive it is to build that market rate housing, the more per unit government or any other builder, any other developer has to subsidize to make that unit affordable, right? Now in the low income tax credit space, which is perhaps the most valuable financing tool we have in the housing space, you can use that tax credit to make a prospectus work and to make that unit affordable for someone who's at that lower income level. But when you come higher, right, when you come into that middle income space, you don't have those same tools, right? And that's what makes it so difficult for us to produce the number of units we need to produce in Summit County. So if you break that down, there's a couple of different levers we have, right? One of them is land. So I'll start with you guys. You know, the governor started this session in his State of the State address and established the topic of land use as his top priority. What does that mean? Why is that so important? Why is that one of the levers that we need to build middle income housing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I think what the governor, during his State of the State speech, really wanted to harp on is that we're at this crisis level where we all need to be working together, and housing really is climate policy, it is economic policy, it is public health policy, it is equity policy. And first and foremost, we do have, I mean, to Geraldine's point, we do have gaps. I think part of the reason some of these policies are so important, as well as all the other factors too, right? Financing, labor, all of these other factors are important. But if we can actually work together along with, you know, the state, local partners on addressing some of these land use challenges, we can address some of the affordability issues that we have. So when the governor says, you know, let's have more housing options for every Colorado budget, it's really getting at, again, introducing more of those housing typologies that just have traditionally not been built, and kind of getting away from just the single family home as the option. I think the other piece of that, in terms of just the governor's vision, and I think a lot of the conversations we've had over the last 2-3 years, is how do we have more smart, efficient development where we actually are conserving water, where we're reducing emissions, where workers can live in the communities that they serve. So while you're reducing housing costs and building costs and water costs, you're also actually having you're having a healthier financial future because you're not spending so much money on commute times. So when Nathan talked about, you know, looking at our commuting patterns, especially in the rural resort regions when you can't afford to work or to live where you work, you know, gas prices are up. So how can we look at the levers that we have in the land use space that actually impact all of these other policy areas too and can save money? So it's about introducing and allowing for more types. And again, Summit County has been a leader in some of these other housing types, but how can we introduce other homes for every Colorado budget how can we also look at this as an environmental issue and integrate better water conservation measures? And then also, again, reducing transportation costs. So it's all of those things that I think impact affordability. And I think until we look at it holistically, we're not going to be able to address this problem.
So Nathan, you know, following up on what Eleni says, and you brought it up in your opening remarks, right? Density, this idea that if you put more homes on a smaller piece of property, it makes it more affordable. It makes it more equitable. It makes that home perhaps closer to transportation and a better use of limited resources. And again, right, everybody says, well, we need density, but maybe not here, right? So talk to us a little bit about why it really is important for communities like ours to embrace density and why that's part of the conversation that the state's having right now.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Like you said. I mean, in theory, it makes sense, but in practice, we all have cars and our kids have cars, and density is tough to make work when you've got to deal with snow storage, like on a day like today, on a heavy winter where we all hope we continue to have this problem of snow storage. So there's, especially when it comes to rural resort areas, density is a different challenge than it is in the metro areas, and that's something everybody needs to account for, and I think is accounting for in this conversation. But it still can really work really well as far as trying to make it easier then for people to walk and bike and take transit to their needs. You really need good density to make transit work. There's just a kind of a minimum level of density that can then people can walk to the bus station, and then the transit's then serving enough people to make it worthwhile to have really good frequent transit, and then that positive feedback loop kind of continues. It also obviously helps with high land costs and with high construction costs. It doesn't work everywhere and in all times, of course, and it's going to look different in every community as far as what works. But overall, there's been an allergy in the country as a whole to density in certain places and times, and it's something that I think is getting a second look now as we kind of get into this crisis period of where people just can't afford single family homes anymore and they need these more affordable types. But also it's just showing up more and more in the surveys of what do people want, what are their housing preferences, what are their lifestyle preferences. They're willing to trade out a little less space and a little less size of their yard, being closer to their neighbors in order to have the amenities and the options and travel opportunities that density affords. So I think does that kind of get to a lot of.
If I could just add one other thing, I think the other key piece of this too is in increasing our supply, also ensuring that there's affordability when you're increasing the supply. So you're not just building just market rate housing, because then that's actually just getting us into more of a glut than the crisis right now. I think the other part of it is that different jurisdictions throughout the state have really uniquely tailored affordability provisions, and I think that the state, especially in a lot of these conversations, wants to make sure to protect what local jurisdictions are doing to address affordability, whether that's through certain deed restrictions, and then the other piece is not having an unintended consequence of short-term rentals as well. Like we recognize how important those factors are and how flexible it needs to be.
So let's, Garrett, talk a little bit about this. You know, traditionally in Colorado, land use and planning and zoning have been the purview of local governments. And there's pluses and minuses to that approach. So from your perspective as a developer, once land has been secured, before we even get to financing, you got to figure out how to make this development work for a neighborhood and how to make it work for a community. So can you talk a little bit about what tools you need from cities and counties to make a project successful?
Yeah, the first is the easiest one, which is just open lines of communication, right? So we're all here today talking about the problem. For the developers in the room, if you had a marginally successful pro forma 18 months ago, you are dead in the water today under those same conditions. And we know that, right? Rents have not kept pace with funding. So you're lucky in that, and very fortunate in that, if you email Summit County Housing and explain the situation, they're going to be responsive and they're going to come to the table and I study this problem all across the U.S. It's a mixed bag with who's on the other side of the table with you, who those public partners are. You're very fortunate here in that you're going to have a responsive local government coming to the table with tools and tactics that have been successful on prior projects. They're going to come with a resume of projects where they've implemented things in the past. So, I think sometimes as developers, we get too focused on certainty. We want certainty, because private capital runs away from ambiguity. So if there's uncertainty, the private capital cannot get far away from it fast enough. However, in this situation that we're in right now, there's opportunity for creative, enterprising developers to reach out to those public partners and say, hey, I've got X number of market rate units, and your density bonus doesn't work, and here's why. Let me walk through this pro forma with you. And in Summit County, you're going to have, at least for this group of Summit County professionals, you're going to have sophisticated counterparties that can walk through that with you and explain how to tease out, well, what if we pulled this lever? What if we pulled that lever? So in the case of a local subsidy, or just getting clarity and support on how to navigate entitlements. Because I think we all know entitlements don't actually entitle
What's
you to
an
much.
entitlement?
Well, they don't entitle you to anything. It entitles you to go ask for permission.
What is it for folks
Okay,
that
so
don't
it just says I have a piece of land, and I have if I can get approval, then I have the right to come back and ask for approval again, to hopefully someday build something. And that's how it works. And there's a certain political discretion that I think is necessary in a democracy where people have a voice at the table, the neighbors and even the NIMBYs. They can come and say, I love that teacher, I just don't want her to live there. And that they have the right to say that. But the entitlement process, it's a ground up process, it's a grassroots process that allows you to go from I have this idea to I have a fully permitted set of drawings, and now I can go out and get my financing and put a shovel in the ground and actually build this. I think the punchline on how Servitas as a P3 developer views this is finding public partners who are willing to have that conversation and dig into the details and actually be an author in the solution. You're very fortunate in that Summit County has those leaders.
Thanks. We don't always.
I was talking about Jason and
Yeah,
Dan,
I
but
know.
I understand.
All right, so we've got our land, we've got our developer, we've gotten our entitlements. And that may take a long time because we want to make sure that the neighbors and the community have the opportunity to weigh in on, will the project have appropriate ingress and egress for wildfire, and is there enough water to support that project? So we've done all those things, now we have to pay for this project. So Geraldine and Andrew, in terms of CHAFA and the work that DOLA does, what comes next?
Do you want me to go first?
I think you were probably first in the line of succession there, so
Okay.
start with you.
Okay, so the performance built out, right? We know what our costs are going to be. We have the entitlement. Folks will often come to CHAFA to look at us to provide either construction finance, permanent finance, and in the middle income space, what we've recently been able to bring to the table is middle income access program finance. So oftentimes because these developments that are serving somewhat higher incomes, they may be more attractive to a traditional equity investor or a first mortgage lender. And yet, even with those resources, they still don't have enough to quite bridge the gap in order to make the rents just below market, but still affordable to that middle income tenant. So that's where we might be able to come in. So the problems we were talking about earlier, existing resources don't support for middle income access. CHAFA recognized that. We were hearing from our local community partners, help us. We have this real issue. What can you do? We put together just an innovation using some of our own resources that are more flexible than ones that traditionally come with federal strings, for example, and said, what if we just created some mezzanine debt, some behind that traditional equity, behind that traditional first mortgage, some mezzanine debt to bridge that gap for that particular developer? Could we help them solve? And with the initial pilot program, we were thrilled to see that it actually did work. It had resonance in the market. It had resonance for our developer partners who were trying to lean into this space. And even better, it was working in what usually are considered harder to serve communities, like your mountain resort communities. I mean, when we saw our first deal in Denver, we were excited, but we thought, okay, well, it's Denver, right? I mean, that is the city center. What will this do in Keystone? What will this do in a Steamboat Springs? And it's working there. So we've been able to help support developers who are bringing more middle-income rental units online with that mezzanine debt. So that's something that we can offer. And there's been a lot more innovation that we were talking about at the state level. So, Andrew.
Yep. So where the state comes in this whole process is really at the end. So we are what we call a gap funder. So we look for the last mile. If you think about infrastructure, the last mile of internet connectivity, the state's funding for housing is really the last mile of money to get the project breaking ground and ready to go. So, we view our job as taking a look at what everybody else has done, what the benefit is going to be, and how can the state get us to the end. We have constraints where, we also need to think about, it's not an unending funding source. So we need to be fiscally responsible to the taxpayers as well as proactive to the communities who really need this resource. So our kind of last mile funding may take the form of a grant. Could there be a little bit of money that can be invested to get this thing done in exchange for a guarantee of permanent affordability? Or could it be the friendliest loan financing you've ever heard of? And we in our business call that a cash flow loan. What does that mean? When the state makes a loan for affordable housing, traditionally we make the loan to a developer and we tell the developer, you need to pay this back, but only if you make a profit, right? So that if they go through tough times, they don't necessarily need to pay the state back. Now, clearly, we're not going to do that for all of the financing. That wouldn't necessarily be prudent. But if that very friendly type of loan got put in place to get the project broken ground, that's something that we'd love to see. We also have staff that will work with our developer, maybe our local municipal and county partners, as well as the financing sources, to think outside the box. There could be a point where we know that Garrett's project is ready to go, but interest rates went up. Now all of a sudden that construction loan is going to cost them $1 million more than they penciled it 7 months ago. There's a gap there. What can the state do? Well, we could come in with $1 million, but we can't do that for everything. We can also maybe refer Garrett and their bank lender to a community financial institution that the state has invested in to say, could that community financial institution provide a 1% interest construction loan? Well, if they can do that, then maybe Garrett's deal with Bank of America, just pulling them out of the hat because they're national, and they could lower the construction amount from that national bank, use that little local low interest debt, and therefore bring the overall cost of building that apartment building down to a point where it works. And kind of everybody is able to get the project off the ground. So that's what's been exciting, thanks to some of these new financing tools that the legislature has passed, that we have a lot of different options to try to get us across the finish line or through that last mile.
Okay, Jason, so for the average resident in Summit County, none of this matters. The only thing that matters is having a home, right? Being able to live in a community in which you work. So how does this all come together in terms of Summit County's housing strategy?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, with housing, as you look across Colorado, you look across the nation, you look across the world, there are no silver bullets and quick fixes to the housing issues that are going on nationwide. So with the Summit County strategy is a broad brush. It's more like silver buckshot instead of a silver bullet, where we're looking at a lot of different things. To Garrett's point about ambiguity and removing ambiguity in the entitlement process, we're in process of doing a code audit and updating our development code. Logan Simpson is out front if you want to give comments on that for the developers in the room. To make it easier, to make it more streamlined, to remove those barriers. We partner with other jurisdictions, with the town of Breckenridge, with Silverthorne, with Dillon, Frisco to buy land, to create partnerships, to build rental and for sale housing. We partner with private developers to create housing. We go through and in expanding the code, creating programs to incentivize and streamline ADUs. Just since we've updated our code last year on the ADUs, we've seen a threefold increase in the applications of ADUs coming through. And as we continue to revise that with stock plans and grants for ADUs, we hope to see even more ADUs being brought on. We have, the projects that we're working on are across a wide range of AMIs. There are a wide range of types, whether it's for rent or for sale. Adaptive reuse with converting hotels that into workforce housing to cover both low and missing middle rents. So we have a wide range of strategies that we're pushing forward, and some are more effective than others, and it's really opening up. I forget one of our more important ones: preservation of the existing housing stock with housing helps, lease to locals, opening up housing that wasn't previously there with lease to locals. It was short-term rentals. Now we have over 150 people that where housing was there, but it wasn't being utilized for the local workforce. And with housing helps, creating nearly 80 units in 2 years. And preserving the existing housing stock for the future in the local workforce.
So everything but the kitchen sink.
Throwing everything but the kitchen sink at it.
So I know this group will have lots of questions. So I want to wrap up the sort of panel portion before we go to audience questions with this question for all of you. What gives you hope that Summit County in 10 years will have an adequate housing situation, will be able to meet the needs of its middle income workforce? And why is that important? I'll start with Geraldine this time. I picked on you.
Off the hook, Garrett.
Thanks,
For the time.
appreciate it.
What gives me hope? Well, at CHAPA, we have a vision. We have a vision that everyone in Colorado deserves the opportunity for housing stability and economic prosperity. And we take that seriously. And I think about what that means. Everyone in Colorado, that means anyone along that housing continuum, anyone in any of our 64 counties, different genders, different races, different ethnicities, different backgrounds. And we are committed to solving that. And yet we can't solve it alone, but I look at all the dedicated people on the panel, I look at everyone in the room, and I know the passion that exists for really leaning in, innovating, and addressing these critical issues. I often say housing is where one story starts, and I think that's true at an individual and a family level, and I think that's true for a community level. And so those two elements, our vision as an organization, the collaboration of different stakeholders who are leaning in, and the recognition that home is where the story starts, is what gives me hope that by working together, this challenge, along with the broader state's housing challenges, will continue to have progress made towards them. Thank you.
Yeah, what gives me hope is, the county, the local jurisdictions, and the Summit Combined Housing Authority have been really proactive, and in some cases leading the state in, creating the key to housing. The key to below market housing is funding and financing, because the private sector isn't able to generally create that without a public partner to make it profitable. So the county, the towns, by implementing the sales tax fees, looking back, what have they done with that in the last couple of years, the last handful of years since 2016, when the larger 5A came into effect? There's been over 20 projects and over 1,000 units that have been created in both low and middle income housing, with several other projects, looking into the future, into the pipeline, with 1,700 units. And if you with Lake Hill being roughly 900, you move that out, it's still like 800 units that are in the pipeline, looking forward to creating a wide range of AMI types and a wide range of housing typologies. So the vigor that the Summit County and the other towns are are looking at housing and being very proactive and moving the needle forward to take care and manage what they have control of, and land that was sitting vacant, doing something with that, creating housing, and finding partnerships with Habitat for Humanity, partnering with other jurisdictions, with other potentially even other counties, exploring those options. Really excited to see all of the options and leaving no stone unturned, and listening for and hearing new ideas about where we might be able to be more effective with housing.
I am new to government, only 3 years. Prior to that, I was in the private sector, also doing housing finance. So very, very much new to this entire landscape. What gives me hope is that this issue of housing seems to cut across the entire political spectrum and the entire spectrum of communities around the state, from the Eastern Plains to the Front Range, to our rural resort areas, to our rural communities on the Western Slope. Housing is important to everybody, and therefore that's really generated the will to start creating some of these innovative funding sources and programs. And then what I'm really excited about is, as I said, as I sit here today, our staff down in Denver are going over kind of one of the first biggest innovative programs. And we're excited about being able to make awards and move applications forward that 3 years ago we would have never accepted the application, let alone considered funding it, because we had very hard and fast rules. There was only one way to do things. And so I'm excited, and I have a lot of hope that we're actually putting in to practice a lot of these great ideas from only a year and a half ago, funding from a year ago, and now we're actually doing it today. So I'm eternally an optimist, but I am very excited because I'm seeing the progress on the ground.
Yeah, same kind of thing. I think the fact that you're holding these kind of events and we have a full room here is very hopeful. I think the state level, there's a lot going on, and really at the national level too. It's going to take changes at the national level as well. But these problems are so widespread now across the country. I've been surprised after being just a land use dork for a lot of years and no one ever caring, like how much there's a lot of interest around this subject now, because we are at the point where we have to do something.
I love this question. I think I echo everything that has been said. I think what gives me the most hope is really this collaboration. Actually, it's twofold: collaboration and innovation. I think having committed leaders like Commissioner Pogue, the governor, and other local elected leaders really charging on this issue. I think, at the state level, I can say that I'm very hopeful because the administration is prioritizing housing for the second term. I think looking at all of the different things that the agencies do that impact housing is another thing that we're trying to do to cut red tape and to look at our processes, knowing that we could be streamlining processes. I think just taking a step back, though, again, what I'm most hopeful for is we've been able to make tremendous progress the last 3 years. But we've also taken in so many ideas, so many perspectives, knowing that housing is not a one-size-fits-all. You cannot have policy that's a one-size-fits-all, but how can we make some changes together, have these conversations like we are today, where we can look at what's unique to the different areas and make adjustments and actually partner together, not only to leverage all of the funding and the financing that we all talked about today, but also walk in lockstep together on policy solutions to create a sustainable future. And again, I think Colorado is such a great place to live. We want to keep it that way, and we want to make sure that the people who live here can afford to buy a home, and that can be within reach. So that's what I'm most hopeful for.
All right,
I'm
Garrett.
really glad to go last. So in developer land, we don't traffic in hope.
I beg to disagree.
We suffer from some aspiration on occasion, but
As a planner, I'm gonna have to disagree.
so, if I look back at kind of my journey in life, my first place I remember growing up, it was Section 8 housing, and then we kind of went through the food chain of getting into a single family home. Eventually, when I first got married and we were a young couple, we bought a row home, a 0 lot line home in Dallas, and we've progressed since then into a single family home. And there are a lot of people on that journey. I think we need to remember not everyone comes from the same place. So when you're making decisions on behalf of someone else, having as much empathy as you can muster, like that's better than their current position. So it doesn't have the sauna and the pool, but it's a warm roof over their head, and that's sufficient for now, for where they are, for the chapter of their life that they're in. I am a bit hopeful that we now have 2 finance authorities at the state level to tackle this. And then I wish they weren't here to hear this, but competition always benefits the consumer, right? So we have 2 finance authorities that now can play in this space, and that's going to help bring housing supply to the market. I am hopeful that new development models will be born out of these constraints. At Servitas, we are pioneering something new with municipalities in Colorado, specifically targeting alpine environments, rural ski areas, where this housing deficit has been in place for a generation. And the greeting has been pretty warm and pretty receptive and open to being creative, so that gives me some hope. And I'm hopeful that everyone in this room stays nimble, because we just can't predict kind of what's going to hit us next. But what we do know in the meantime is that we need to bring new supply to the market at rents that are affordable for the people that actually make our community function. And I think everyone in the room recognizes that, and there's actually political will to support that. So that gives me hope.
Sounded like hope.
It did sound
You
like
didn't
hope.
want to be hopeful. All right. We are very interested in the questions from this audience. We're going to give this a shot without a mic, so if everyone can project, that would be amazing. If it doesn't work, we have one, and I can certainly walk around it and give it to folks. So raise your hand.
Hi, my name is Boot Gordon. A little voice told me that there's a shortage of housing up here, so I thought I'd come to this meeting. And you need new low-cost housing? I'm demand. Okay. My name is Boot Gordon. I was a fighter pilot in World War II, and my occupation is designer, and I write letters to the editor. Anyway, there's no money in it, but I got my nickname in World War II in training, and my airplane wouldn't come out of a spin. And so I jumped out of this dumb airplane and waited and pulled the ripcord, and I waited and didn't open. And so a little voice says, "Hey, pull it again." And I argue, can you imagine anybody so dumb? Here's my guardian angel trying to save my life, and I couldn't listen. See, finally I did, and I pulled the ripcord again, and I was 500 feet above the ground. And I'm going 130 miles an hour. That's 2 miles a minute, or a minute and 30 seconds. I'm 500 feet above the ground. That's 1/10 of a mile. Hey, 1/10 of 30 seconds is 1,001, 1,002, 1,000, splat. I'm dead, see. Anyway, so I'm lucky to be here, you know. So what I've come out with, my life was saved 3 times during World War II and a couple times during the Korean War. And so Billy, back in 1946, I took a course in Garden City in the University of Minnesota, the School of Architecture. And ever since then, I've been interested in housing and in the town of tomorrow and architecture and art and so forth. 1959, a couple of friends and I we built a free-form foam house in Minnesota, but it was just a little model. But we made it was the first foam house in the world, maybe, and it was, again, it was just a model. But we did make the Minneapolis paper, and we made the TV. In 1971, I designed and built the foam house I live in Silverthorne. It's got 15 domes and 15 levels, and I think it cost $90,000, 8 bedrooms and 3 baths. Okay, and then 1971.
Boot, I hate to cut you off, but we have a lot of people here who want to ask questions too. And
Okay.
we're only at 1971, and I wasn't even born yet. So can you maybe just get to, today?
I won't go into any details of what I've been doing, but here's my idea: is our art is wrong. We should be based our art on godliness. Remember, you be gods, so we should have thoughts that are godly. We should use words that are godly, and we should create works that are godly. Okay, our architecture is wrong. We shouldn't be based it on the box. We should base it on the curve. Everything in nature is curved. Look out there. Look at beautiful women. They're not boxy. Hey, listen, we've got to start using our city plans are wrong. We must encourage a sense of community, and our cities don't do that, and they're not close to nature. We have to be close to nature. Our construction methods are wrong. People have been building these stick-built houses, and I've been one build houses out of rebar and foam and concrete. A tree this big fell on top of my house this last summer. It was a live blue spruce. It was huge. It was heavy. Guess what happened to my house? Nothing. It would have destroyed a regular house. Okay, our urban transportation is wrong. We shouldn't have cars. We should start walking and bicycling and have monorails. Our health system is wrong. Our school system is wrong. I got 8 ideas. Our economic approach is wrong. 1 in 1,000 in capitalist America is a capitalist. Isn't there something wrong with that? How about making 100 of us, 100% of us? Okay.
Thank you, sir. We need to move on.
Wait a minute. No. Now here's what I recommend.
Okay. One more
I'm all
recommendation.
through.
I know. We got to go though. Okay.
I know.
Time is going.
I recommend that we build a town of tomorrow in a ski area between Lake Dillon and Silverthorne, between Lake Dillon and I-70. There's a big piece of forest land there. And we build a ski area for poor people, just palm-lifts, and not for the rich. And then we also build low-cost housing. I can build low-cost housing for 1/10 the cost of a contemporary construction. Okay, so my proposal is, give me some backing. I'll go see my friend in Minnesota, who's a governor of Minnesota, who was a senator from Minnesota, and I'll go see Biden, and we can get the financing. We don't need any financing. All we need to do is build this town tomorrow. We can rebuild Ukraine. We can build these cities around the world. That's it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I see another hand raised. If we can keep our questions to just a couple minutes so everybody can get a chance to interview our panel, that would be great. Thank you.
So I'm aware that we have a limited amount of land in Summit County. What's the reality there, and what's the reality statewide? Is what of the amount of land that is available for market, as well as the affordable, whether it's 80% AMI or 60, or somebody who works for $20 an hour?
It's a great question. Jason, you want to talk about what we have left in Summit County?
Yeah, so that within Summit County, just like start several levels to that question, like looking at what just undeveloped land that's available right now in Summit County that the county could utilize for workforce housing. There's only a couple parcels that are really available right now, and generally, other than Lake Hill, which is 45 acres, every other parcel is like 2 acres, that has decent access, maybe not full access, but decent access to utilities. But so there's not a lot of also I should caveat that by saying that we're not converting open space over into housing, so we're just leaving the open space as it is. The county has spent, a lot of money preserving the open space, to create these view corridors that we have. So, but looking at the private sector, you can always change the zoning. For example, Frisco's a good example where we are here. There's a lot of lots here where there's a single family home, but it's zoned for 3 units of density. So you're seeing that happen a lot in other areas. And as towns, in the 1900s, they thought San Francisco was built out. It wasn't. They built a lot more of it, changing in density, changing in zoning. So That will probably always happen as as towns and jurisdictions and cities develop. Zoning will be changed, but there's not a lot of available land left in just unincorporated Summit County that is readily accessible to water, sewer, etc. The jurisdictions have some lots that are available, but still there's not a lot left. So we're trying to maximize the little bit that we have.
Statewide perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's a reality, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, the state, and actually Executive Director Gibbs was here a second ago, from our Department of Natural Resources. From the state's perspective too, the state is also a major landholder. I think that there's a delineation between the different types of land that we have, right? So you have land that actually is buildable, and then land that is, I say raw land, but has a lot of challenges with infrastructure and so forth. But I think even just was it last year, the Frisco workforce? Mm-hmm. So even just last year, our Colorado Department of Labor and Employment had an underutilized property, actually it's like right there. A workforce center that, due to the impact of the pandemic and also just underutilization, we, from the state level, worked on a deal with Summit, Frisco, and partners to actually dispose of that property because it's prime land. Again, there's a structure on it, but I know that you actually know probably more of the status of that now. Someone here.
Frisco, yeah. We could let Frisco speak.
So that's an example. And then the second thing I just wanted to call attention to, as you also mentioned, the public-private partnerships piece of this too, is we're actually running a bill through legislative session right now, sponsored by Senator Roberts, that would allow for more facilitation of public-private partnerships with state-owned land. That also includes like school districts who own land, other local jurisdictions that own land, to really be able to offer land that's available. So we've identified, I want to say above 50 parcels statewide that could be used for development. And the last thing I'll just mention on just availability of land, we had, sorry CDOT, we have about 9 acres in the Vail Valley area called Dow Junction, where CDOT actually currently leases that property from State Land Board, and about 3.5 acres of that property is buildable for around 80 workforce units. So really our goal with this bill, this session, and other efforts in collaboration with local partners like the Frisco Workforce Center example, is where we have land and where there's these acute crises, we really want to offer our land as a solution to buy down the cost. And again, that also takes us looking at more of our inventory, especially in the high country areas.
Who else? Stan.
I understand that this is a panel discussion about the I don't think this thing's working anyway. About the middle.
It's good. You're good, Stan. It's just for the camera.
But Summit County and almost every ski area in the country, especially in the western end, doesn't have a middle. We have a bimodal distribution of income, and it represents, instead of a curve that looks like this, we have a curve that looks like this, and here's our middle. Our middle is small. Our real need is at the bottom end of what you might want to call the middle. And listening to everything, I heard the word apartment once. Why aren't we concentrating in Summit County on providing apartment housing as opposed to more condos and more market rate housing, et cetera, et cetera? Apartments seem like they would be the real solution and something that could be built. Apologies to you, I know you don't like the idea of building apartments.
Go ahead, Garrett. Why don't you take that one?
Me too. Good to meet you, Stan. Respectfully disagree with you. There is a middle. The reason you can't see it is because they can't afford to live here. So if they had a place to live, they would happily live here. I think if you talk to your elected leaders, their challenge is finding a city manager, recruiting somebody from out, or a new city engineer or county engineer, recruiting someone from a different market who has a college, 2-income household, college educated, in any other area of the U.S. would be kind of a white collar family in a suburb. They come here, they're completely priced out of the market. So it doesn't show up in the numbers because those people can't be surveyed. So, you're surveying something that doesn't exist. And as a developer, I can't wait to make the market. It's a great thing for a developer to be able to come in and say, oh, it's not just a problem that people can't rent at an affordable price, they can't rent at any price. So if we can just get the supply in the market, it's a fantastic play for a developer who has a public partner to make it work. And the unspoken word apartments, that's exclusively what I'm focused on. The upside for a developer in a multifamily is much higher than custom single-family homes. And frankly, I don't know if I want to deal with that homeowner anyhow. So I would much rather build apartment communities that address this problem in a unique and creative way.
Yeah,
So-
and to follow up on, sorry.
You go ahead, Jason.
Okay, just in talking about what's in the pipeline right now, what's being built, what has been built, there are several hundred units of apartments that are in process, that are going through the pipeline, that will be opening up, that have just opened up. If you look at Alta Verde 2, Smith Ranch Apartments, Wintergreen Ridge, I mean, that's probably 500 right there that are in process right now.
Apartments.
All apartments. And I definitely hear from the middle folks looking for housing, or they can't afford the traditional deed-restricted housing. The demand is across the board, but Summit County and ski areas, they definitely have the seasonality of a worker influx coming through, and then it's getting less and less seasonal, but it's still somewhat seasonal.
Geraldine.
I was going to say, I don't disagree. I think it's a yes and. I think we need more investment and more affordable housing that is traditionally apartments, right, at the lower AMIs. And I think we need more resources and more housing to support the middle income as well. And those, at least what we're supporting through our middle income access program, have all been apartments as well. So I think it's all across the continuum that we need to lean in. And if I may just say to the gentleman earlier, thank you for your service. And I had a lens into your notes because I was sitting right here, and right at the top, you had think outside the box, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. So thank you for your comments. Thank
John,
you for the question.
I think mostly I want to just make some compliments and comments more than a question. But one of the most heartening things happening right now, I mean, I go back to having been a commissioner in Eagle County and working for many years on a land exchange process that, was with the Forest Service, was 130 different steps. It took, 12 or 15 years. Part of it was with the State Land Board. I spent a year going to State Land Board meetings just to figure out how they work and think. One of the most heartening things going on right now is this urgency from the governor's office, because almost every town has a CDOT property that is very underutilized. CDOT was very wise in getting housing for its workers back in the day and having all these different administrative sites. But when I look at it's taken forever, but the use of the administrative sites through the Forest Service, and thanks to Senator Bennett and others over the years who have really helped enable those, that was enabled during the Bush administration. Is how far that's gone. But I think it's really heartening, that kind of cooperation from the governor's office. Here's my question, though. Is the governor's office thinking of anything that is uncomfortable for those of us at the local level, and thinking out of the box? Things like Oregon and Washington eliminating single-family zoning. We've been very nice and lovey-dovey here today. I just want to know if there's anything, because we are very passionate about our local control in Colorado, but I also think that might be one of the outside-the-box things that may need to get broken a little bit. That's a wide-open question.
Absolutely. Another great question. So just thank you for your comments. I really appreciate it. I think, first and foremost, I don't think that the governor or what we're exploring is saying we're eliminating single-family zoning statewide. We're not looking to do that. We're actually just looking at how can we make it easier to build other types of housing. I think really to the comment around uncomfortable, I actually really welcome being uncomfortable in this space, because I think we're at this level where we do have to partner with local governments, learn from you all, hear input of what's working, what doesn't work. And I think going back to what I said earlier about kind of not a one size fits all is allowing for so much local flexibility, but also setting some statewide goals, because we have to have some level of statewide intervention to make some of these things easier, but that doesn't happen without local collaboration. So I hope that answers part of your question, and I think it's an ongoing conversation as these needs are ongoing, and I think back to what we said in the beginning, it's about being nimble, being flexible, knowing that every region is different. When I think about the issue of parking and thinking about policies that might work in the front range of eliminating parking minimums, like that's just not going to work in some areas in rural resort regions. So those are all things that we've spent a lot of time, I mean, even just dating back to 2021 when we had one of our first incentive approach bills. You know, we've built on that work every year, and I think we've taken in so much input, and we want to continue having everybody at the table to have those conversations. But I think, again, the governor's not looking to eliminate single-family zoning, but make it easier for these other types of housing. And also, again, just make it easier with processes, and that also means looking at state processes too, and how can we make it easier for you all as well. I don't know if, Nathan, you have more to add.
Yeah, I can just add, just having been at the local level for 13 years and the state for just 2 years, I think just from having had the chance to be a part of the discussions with a lot of local jurisdictions in this process, that I've been really impressed with the level of attention to the differences between the western slope and the rural resort areas versus the urban areas, and how important it is to get the flexibility right with that, and to just think about how different it is. I mean, it's totally different up here than it is in Denver. So I think that's the main takeaway I hope everyone has from this is I think it's being really well thought out because of all the conversations like this happening across the state.
I work with a program called Unsheltered Summit. Right now we provide, Andrew, I'm thinking the question is for you. We provide safe parking for folks who work in the county but can't afford the rents, and give them time to build money and be able to move up the ladder in that way. We are hoping to renovate the old Frisco Library on 90 Madison, but we have no money. And what we do have is the building. It's sound. All we have to do is scrape the inside and start over. We're looking at $5-6 million to buy and renovate it. The building owner actually approached us, doesn't want to make much at all on it. So we're already fitting into the scenario that you folks are talking about, hoping for. We have it. We need one of two things. We either need $6 million outright, and we're good to go. We could scrape it tomorrow and start on it. Or we need a low funding bridge loan for the owner. He's paying $20,000 a month right now on what he has. Now we're already started the process of applying to the state, so we'll see what comes out of that. Are you talking about some funding other than what's presently out there, specifically HB 1304? When you're talking about providing some money to help banks decrease their profit but still engage?
Yep. So I appreciate that. You tee me up for something I'm excited about in a very soon what's next that I get pretty passionate about at the state. So you referred to the first two of our transformational grant programs. House Bill 1304 provided $138 million for affordable housing projects from homelessness response through home ownership. And House Bill 1377 provided an additional $105 million for homelessness response, including shelter. Those are happening as we speak, and those may be some of the applications you all are considering. Next, and a very soon next, is the state's rolling out of what was Senate Bill 159. That provided innovative loan capital at the state level that the state could roll out. And you will soon, late spring, early summer, see the state opening up what we call a term sheet, but essentially a loan program that could be that short-term construction financing at very low rates, so that that you could afford to get that bridge loan or that interim financing and bring the cost of that capital down. So I won't go too long into the weeds, but the answer to your question is yes, there is a next there, and we will continue to roll out these programs based on the statute that we've been given to help get projects like you speak of off the ground from the Division of Housing's perspective. And then, when we're talking about kind of innovative projects like that, is there also a healthcare policy department resource that could come into play? Is there an economic trade and development resource that can come into play to really help braid lots of different funding? And I don't know why I singled them out, CDOT as well, right? To help braid lots of funding that can help us, create spaces that both provide housing, provide transportation infrastructure, economic development. So very excited, but absolutely there's more to come, and it's coming quickly.
And so when will 159 be enacted?
It has been. It is when will we roll that program out? I know May, June of this year, because we've received the funding. And to that specific question, those timelines are posted on the Division of Housing website.
So Leslie from the Town of Frisco. I will give a short update on the Town of Frisco since it was mentioned earlier. So we are in the process of working on Granite Park, which is a project in collaboration with CDOT. We actually had the call right before this meeting to discuss our financing of that. So that is coming along, and we expect to break ground on that this spring or summer. Additionally, though, we do have the other project that was mentioned that Summit County helped in the purchase of the land. That is the Colorado Workforce Center. So that'll be the next project we're developing. I am curious, and mentioned of MIHA, if we have any more concrete information, if we were looking to do middle income housing on that lot, would there be potentially new and different state funding that could help do that? Because the alternative might be LIHTC, but what options do we have?
I guess I can take that one, given that I sit on the MIHA board. So Leslie, I will send you an invitation for a stakeholder meeting on MIHA next week. I think it's next week. Last legislative session, the legislature created the Middle Income Housing Authority, and the idea was really for that entity to be able to leverage some tax exempt bonds, similar to what happens in the low income housing tax credit space, but slightly different to accommodate the higher AMIs. So we will roll out the request for proposals, looking for projects around the state that might benefit from that new types of financing by April 1st, which is, a month away. So that's the hope. But in the meantime, I'll get you the information on that, because that may be a good fit for that project.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, I just want to note, I think the forum we're talking about is tomorrow, Wednesday, for me, is it in person?
It's entirely possible.
Yeah,
regardless, I will get you the information.
I'm Mike Anderson with Continuing Partners, we've worked a lot with the governor's office in some county as well on the MIHA stuff, so if you have my contact info while you're done, feel free to reach out. I'm forward to.
Hello. I'm a long-term Summit County resident, over 30 years, and I've watched this problem unfold over decades. Right now, and with all due respect to you folks, the very much focus is on building and developing. And in Summit County, we're a recreation-based economy. The amount of building that's been occurring in and near trailheads and our resources really impacts that. So my question, my challenge to you all is there is no one silver bullet. There's a silver buckshot, right? And utilizing existing housing stock. This is something that's kind of been swept under the rug and ignored over the decades. Oh, blah, 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 any number of reasons why this is just not practical or possible. But really, anything's possible when you think outside the box and you change your perspective. And so that's the challenge to you all. Instead of seeking how can we spend taxpayer dollars together with private entities, spend, build, let's look for ways to structure transactions that facilitate the utilization of existing stock. For example, Maybe it's not practical, I don't know. But this sort of thinking. Okay, somebody's sitting on a big fat capital gain. Well, if you sell your property for an affordable price, maybe those capital gains can be utilized as a tax credit for however long that's going to last. Things of this nature. And rather than a public-private partnership, a private-private partnership between the buyer and the seller, and utilizing the expertise and resources of the governor's office and other offices to structure transactions in a way that could potentially make sense, and this could be another few pieces of buckshot in the solution. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that in the last couple of years, we have definitely turned to maximizing the preservation side. We've created hundreds of units in the last 2 years with the housing helps, adaptive reuse of converting hotels into housing, and lease to locals. I agree. We need to keep on pushing that forward, and because that is a huge asset that has a lot of potential to help solve and mitigate the housing issue. We look at a lot of things. So we do also see development as a part of that solution, but we are looking at the reutilization, adaptive reuse, and preservation.
And I'll just add, I think I agree with your point. I think there's a lot that can be done. Sadly, counties and municipalities don't have a lot of authority over taxation. And a lot of that incentive-based private-to-private kinds of development really require, sorry not to put you on the spot, Lenny, but really do require us to have some more authority to incentivize some of those types of transfers. So it is actually something I have talked to the governor's office about. The governor's office has been very supportive of exploring some other opportunities. In that space.
And I think just adding the last piece of that too is the environmental piece of it too, and preservation and just adaptive reuse. So if you have a vacant commercial building that you can renovate for a residential use, that also has an environmental impact in that it can be more efficient. So it's definitely part of the solution, and I think part of the broader conversation for sure.
All right, we will do one last question. Who wants to be the last question of the day? All right.
Do I need the mic?
You do. One sec.
Hi, Sarah McLean. I'm just a citizen of Summit County, and I hear all of your roles. They're very big. You have your hands full. What can us as citizens do walking out of here thinking, we need housing, not only low income, but for the middle income and the missing middle? So what can we do?
It's a great question. I think we'll go around on this one because I
wanna
think
answer
everybody's
from
going to,
yeah, from a developer's perspective. So we talked about what do we look like 10 years from now? I hope the problem's gone. It's probably not going to be gone. It's probably still exists to some degree. If the local community becomes a political force to be reckoned with, like a force of nature in the political process, that will safeguard you from 10 years from now, a complete changeover politically, locally, to going from very pro middle income housing, low income housing, very pro housing. That the natural swing the other way is a backlash against all those things. But if you have a coalition that's organized, and anytime anyone wants to run for city council or county council or be on the planning commission, they have to come by and kiss the ring and make sure that you're aligned on policy, then you're going to be safeguarded so that the next 10, 20, 30 years, you do have adequate supply.
I would just say, I think showing up here today is really important. I think that everybody has a role in this. I think the other piece of it is, in addition to kind of having that broad coalition, is also bringing different partners into the pro-housing space, right? So yes, it's about local government leaders. Yes, it's about state leaders. Yes, it's about housing directors. Yes, it's about all of those people and public citizens, but it's also about employers, businesses, and others to all come to the table together. And I think raising awareness as a public citizen, as myself in my role, coming to the Capitol, engaging with the legislature, all of those things are really important. And I think it all starts with having the conversation which you are today.
Yeah, and along the lines of what was said, I think when I was a planning director, you do get so bogged down and kind of beat down by dealing, of course you love working with the community, you wouldn't trade it for anything in the world, but then every once in a while working with the community turns into what you might call NIMBY babysitting at times. And so just hearing from people who's in the community who also see the big picture, are willing to put up with the small amounts of inconvenience that enter your lives from more housing in your community for the greater good, it really means a lot to the local staff and elected officials, and then showing up and saying that at meetings means a lot.
I would offer that thinking about and having conversations about and suggesting those pieces of silver buckshot, those little ideas, you never know where they're going to go. So if we're all thinking outside the box and voicing those thoughts and discussing them with our neighbors, I would also offer that, considering all the other ideas one might hear, even if your initial reaction is, that seems weird for me. I don't know. I've never really thought about not having 4 cars because there's 4 people in our family. You may not come to the decision that you agree with your neighbor, but giving it a moment to consider and thinking all the pluses and minuses of these little suggestions of silver buckshot, I think will help continue the conversation.
Yeah, and I'd just like to echo, letting your electeds know and giving them support, whether it's showing up for a public meeting or sending an email during the public comment process. On all of these projects, the majority of the feedback that they get is will be fairly negative, for the project. But just providing support for the projects and thinking outside the box and to what Garrett said earlier, empathy. And how do we make this better?
I echo all of that. We are not a developer, but developers come to us, and by the time they've come to us, sometimes they've been pretty beat up through the process. So those who are willing to use their voice and be that community activist to speak in support of projects that are moving in the community in the right direction that you all want to go, I think is very powerful. And then I would add to that, housing stability is so much more even just about the roof over one's head. It's about food access, about energy access, about mobility, it's about childcare and access to affordable childcare. And so one of the ways that CHAPA seeks to support all that work is through supporting local nonprofits with direct contributions. And I know this community has some really strong nonprofits who are helping lift up that broader space. So to all of you who might be volunteering with them or contributing to them, thank you for that work as well.
Thank you. That was a great question. Thank you for that. I appreciate all of you taking the time to come up to Summit County. I hope you get a little time to enjoy everything that Summit County has to offer in addition to our housing crisis. And thanks to you all for coming. There is lunch over there. There are some billboards around here that talk a little bit more about the projects we've talked about today, as well as some information from our partners outside. So thanks everybody for coming. Thank you.